I do hope that you have a cup of tea or coffee in front of you to make it more cozy. Usually we do that offline, but hopefully online would be okay as well. So I'm finishing my introduction. Without further ado, over to you. Who will break the ice? Who is the next to take the floor? So actually, probably I bored you with the official statements. Probably you'd like to introduce yourself briefly to Loretta. Let me start. Can you hear me? Good afternoon, Loretta. I'm very glad to meet you because I'm a child neurotherapist. I'm holding seminars for parents, and usually I have about 1,500 parents of children. I'm doing some online seminars. I'm actually working with Williams syndrome at the moment, with retardedness, and your book is the very first book which I recommend to the parents to read. Yes, and I can tell you that this is book number one, a bestseller number one for parents in general, because psychology, I think, is a little bit lagging behind, and without knowing how the brain works, without knowing how neural pathways are working, you cannot do anything. That's why I'm very glad to get that invitation, because I'm your big fan, probably the biggest fan.
Oh.
And your works, your books in Russia are real bestsellers, and I try to disseminate them as much as I can. I just really make everyone read them. I think that this is a very good foundation. And originally, we didn't have these very profound books written in very affordable and easy language. And I thank you for that, because you are helping us, the therapists, in our work. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. I just want to let you know that I have a page on my website for parents and teachers, innermammalinstitute.org/parents-teachers, all one word, parents teachers. And I'd be happy to hear from you if you could think of any specific examples of how families put this into practice, if you don't mind. I'm not hearing anything.
Because no one is speaking.
Okay.
Who is next to introduce?
Oh, what was that okay? I asked Valentina if she would give an example of how families use this. Is that okay?
First of all, we're speaking from the standpoint of a book. For instance, Habits of a Happy Brain, for instance, parents could understand from it how, so this is about the state of alarm. This is about the reactions when we are afraid of something, because in Russia, actually, we have a lot of so-called troubled children with a sense of alarm, and it is not enough just for a mother to tell a child to just be quiet, be confident. Parents have to know how the first reaction of a child may build up a pattern for the rest of their life. And for instance, I draw an example of what we call in Russian rakes, meaning that mistakes which we repeat again and again and again. And in the adult life, we do not understand when we repeat the same mistake again. This is because we did something in childhood. And usually I recommend this book for the parents who would like to get a more profound knowledge. And usually men, the fathers, like it most. And that's great, because in my seminars, I usually focus, I bet, on the fathers, because the fathers would convey that information to the mothers. And then the families would get better results in the yard. They would not be anxious when their children are crying, for instance. And I'm holding some seminars for Europe as well. And probably you know that parents may be anxious whether crying may break the personality of a child, for instance. But after the parents read your book, they are reassured a little bit.
Thank you.
And usually they use these examples and knowledge for their adult life as well, so they can revisit their own reminiscences or whatever they can remember.
The reason this is so special to me is that I'm a grandmother now, and my children are not interested in reading any of my books. So I'm looking for indirect ideas. So I very much agree the idea that a parent must understand their own patterns in order to be less inclined to repeat those patterns with their children. And I totally agree that men have had a great response to this book. And I think I wrote it for men. But the other thing to keep in mind is that life in the past was much harder and everywhere in the world. And today's generation, everyone thinks life is so hard because everyone's just repeating this, and because everyone has so little real threat that the self-created threat patterns that are endlessly created are taken as real because we have no real threats. So it's always important to keep this in perspective. And I think my kids have heard me say that like a lot. Okay. Larissa had a question. I'm not hearing anything.
You will hear me now.
Okay.
Hi.
Okay.
Yes, I found the button. Hi, my name is Lara. I'm really pleased to be here. It was a bit unexpected for me because I was invited spontaneously, and
Yes.
I just started reading your book. So I heard about it a lot because I'm a blogger, and I blog a lot about awareness and conscious life, and my followers, they were like so inspired by your book. Everybody told me, wow, you should read it. You should start now. I was like, okay. And I just started, just looked through it, and it's very interesting for me because I'm a cycle awareness coach, and I study now fertility awareness. And I talk a lot about menstruation and hormones and our, like, our everyday life, and how can this influence our health and well-being, not only body but also mind and our souls. And I have a couple of questions for you, like a couple of just basic, and a couple about our behaviors and development. So I will start from a simple question. How our everyday habits like drinking coffee or alcohol can influence our well-being? Maybe you can talk a little about this, because my followers very interested, and me as well, because I do it every day, not a lot, but a cup. And we, maybe all of us know that the cortisol, the stress hormone, is coming to our blood when we do something stressful, and coffee and alcohol is a stressful stimulating foods. So if you could talk a little about this.
Sure, very big subject. So let's think that there's between one extreme, a person saying, I'm not going to have any coffee or alcohol, and the other extreme of a person who has it constantly and can't control it. So I always start with self-acceptance, and the goal is to be in the middle. Because if you are a person who thinks I'm going to have a perfect body and a perfect life and never have anything bad, then people end up having bad thoughts from their constant worrying about not being healthy enough. And you all know that cortisol is necessary in reasonable amounts. Cortisol is what motivates us to meet our needs. That's explained more in the book. And also in my other book, Tame Your Anxiety, which is more about cortisol. So how can a person have a moderate amount? And first, something I was talking about with Varya, which is being honest with yourself about how much you're actually having. And she talked about journaling as part of that. But another part of it is, again, just being willing to look at your habits instead of being so uncomfortable with what you're really doing that you lie to yourself. So that's the first step. So then the second step is to understand the emotional response that you're looking for. A simple example is bored. When a person says, I'm bored. And in my work, I call that neutral. So if you imagine that you have a car and it has forward and reverse and neutral. And when you're in neutral, you're looking for something that will feel good. And if you don't find something good fast, then bad thoughts will start to come. So that's why people rush into something familiar to turn on those good thoughts. And the familiar thing could be, I'll eat, I'll drink, whatever. So if we have alternative strategies that when I'm in neutral, what can I do to feel good, and build different strategies for how to deal with that moment. So I'll tell you my strategy. So when I have 1 minute that I'm free because I just finished another project and I don't have an appointment. So that's an example of like that in-between minute when you're in neutral. And I view that as a celebration that I get to choose what I'm doing instead of having the next thing forced on me. And when I was young, I had very little choice. Everything was forced on me. So that's my strategy, is to say, wow, I get to choose what I'm doing. But it's so easy when you have a free moment to start having a fear cycle and then try to escape it by going into your old habit. And the other thing I do, I have coffee every 2 days, every other day, instead of every day, so that I preserve some of that special feeling. Because I know that if I had coffee every day, then as soon as I finished, I would want a second coffee. Okay? So, and I think that works well for alcohol too. If usually I have 3 every week, you know, so one day have alcohol, one day no alcohol, just one. And I have to confess that I drink a lot of tea. So when I say I only have 1 coffee, but I drink a lot of tea. But the idea is that when you have something that you like, it feels good at first, but after a while your brain habituates and it doesn't feel good anymore. And so that's why you want more, and that's how we get into bad cycles. So part of it is to have a variety of things that you like, and part of it is to understand the emotional reward that you're looking for, because the drink is not really going to give you that emotional reward. And can I say one other thing on the subject of mindfulness and self-awareness? I'm very happy when I hear from people in this community and they understand very well, but there's some things that I don't agree with on that subject that I just wrote down before I forget. So one of them is that many people in the mindfulness community are chasing effortless ecstasy, like that you're happy every minute and you don't have to, you know, do. And I don't really agree with that. So I don't want to offend anyone, but I think it's putting unrealistic pressure on yourself. And there's also a social comparison aspect where you believe that other people are getting effortless happiness every minute. And I think it's not true. And it's a big relief to know that other people are not getting effortless ecstasy all the time. So that's the first thing. The second thing, in the mindfulness community, many people have this idea that the self is bad and you should erase your selfhood, your separateness. And I don't think this is good or healthy or makes you happy or natural. And I don't even think it's possible. So that's just my opinion.
Thank you. It's really nice. So Mari, you can ask a question if you have one.
Yeah, I have one. As I know, in United States, mindfulness and well-being is such a how it's called, big raising market, like all the applications. Do you mean by saying the unrealistic pressure, do you mean that like all these applications which say, hey, you're gonna become better with our app and so on, like because I feel this pressure on myself, and this is the trap I don't want to get into.
Very good question. Two different traps. So one of them is this self-development that I have to get better all the time. But the other is specifically in the mindfulness community, they believe that the brain has a natural ecstatic state and that with practice you can access it, and that is the goal of life. Excuse me for restating, they may have their own language. And the way that you access that ecstatic state is by obliterating the perceived boundary between yourself and others, which is also the definition of like schizophrenia. So I don't think it's a good thing. So those are two different kinds of pressure. But underneath that, the core pressure is I should be happy all the time, and other people are happy all the time, and I'm missing something. And I totally felt that pressure myself. And then before apps were invented, people had the same pressure. So then when I studied the animal brain, I understood that these chemicals are only designed, it's like a green light. Like if the green light was on all the time, it wouldn't have any information content. So the green light is a happy chemical turns on to tell an animal, now is the time to approach, to invest energy in that direction. That's the job of the happy chemical. It is not meant to be on all the time, but we are meant to always be deciding where we invest our energy. That's what our brain is designed for. So the best thing I can do to be happy is to have confidence in the choices I make, and to say, when I go to bed at night, I made good decisions about how I invest my energy, even though I can't be at the top of the mountain every minute of every day.
Do you think where, by your opinion, is the limit of self-development?
Self-development, is that?
Yeah, self-development.
I'll tell you a funny story. The people who are selling these self-development apps, as soon as they make money, they want to stop doing it themselves, right? Right? Here's a simple way to think about it is, my goal is to be happy and to relax. So when I'm unhappy, then I want to develop my skill at relaxing that specific kind of unhappiness. So I'm always doing it for myself rather than for what do people think of me? Okay.
I have a bunch of questions, but I'll be in a line after the other girls.
I have a granddaughter who is 2, and she's just learning to talk. And she uses the word "my turn" a lot, but she doesn't understand what it means, because when other kids say "my turn," so when she wants to give another kid a turn, she says "my turn," thinking it means them. When she wants a turn, she says "Josie turn." Josie is her name. So that's, I'm thinking of my turn. But if no one else wants a turn, then I'm happy to hear another question from Varya.
Okay. What is your opinion on biohacking industry and biohackers?
Oh, good question. I don't know if you're saying this because you've heard, or no, I guess not. I usually say that I'm against hacking. And then someone did an interview with me, and in the title, they called it "How to Hack Your Brain Chemicals." And I put it on my Facebook, and one of my readers said, "I thought you were against hacking." And I didn't realize what the title said. So the reason I say that I'm against hacking is because it suggests that it's a short-run thing where you feel good by putting something in your mouth. When I say something in your mouth, often a certain nutritional content, and it could be also a drug. And in my experience, our happy chemicals are controlled by the pathways we built when we're young. And understanding those pathways and redirecting them is the way to be happy. And the people who talk about hacking usually don't want to think about their old circuits, because that brings up a lot of fear. So they look for these external shortcuts. So I'm not a fan of the external shortcuts. However, 2 exceptions is many hackers think that what I'm saying is included as hacking, and then of course I agree. So anyone who's willing to look at their early circuits and change them, if that's how they define hacking, that's good. The other exception is no one knows how much of our thoughts come from, our brain versus our physical body. So certainly some people are having physical body issues that are affecting their thoughts. And if I were having that, I would want to try every kind of thing that you could put in your mouth to fix my physical body. So there is a place for that. But if you've already tried that and you're still having a problem, then don't overlook the, the power of being honest about your early experience, so that you can know that it's inside you, so that you don't keep re-triggering it.
It's really hard to be in a conversation with someone who is into biohacking, because they do all these how it's called they say it is the same as, like, for instance, Varya, you drink coffee, it is the same, like, you prefer to drink coffee to feel more energy, or you prefer to eat vegetables to feel more energetic, like I'm avocado addicted or something. But we do the same, but just saving water and so on. And but I don't know, I don't trust to biohacking, because it seems to me like also a huge industry which is putting people into trap, as you called it, shortcuts, because their main purposes is to save time, oh, I'm gonna sleep less so I can work more. And the purposes are kind of mean, a little bit seem mean to me.
Stupid. Yeah. Yes. So the important thing to know about sleep is that we manufacture our happy chemicals while we're sleeping. So it's like you have a reserve tank of happy chemicals that are ready to release. And if you don't get enough sleep, then even if you have a positive experience, it doesn't make you happy because you don't have the chemicals ready to release. And I find that even one night, if I get one night bad sleep, the next day, nothing feels good. So I don't think it's a good strategy. And the other thing that's so important, this social comparison that I always talk about, is part of everybody wants to feel like I have a philosophy of life that is more effective than some other philosophy of life. And there's really nothing wrong with that, because our mammal brain wants to be bigger and stronger. And the healthy thing in the modern world is that most people are not violent, and they're not trying to be bigger and stronger through violence. And that is such a huge achievement in human history, that the fact that they want to be bigger and stronger because of their biohacking or whatever their life theory or philosophy is, it's really a small price to pay for a nonviolent world. However, when you're talking to this person, it's often boring to listen to them because they're always trying to sell their theory. Okay.
Yeah.
I want to invite people to, if you want to ask a question in the chat, maybe if someone wants to write a question that is welcome, write it in Russian or English.
If no one is interested, I can ask another question, or if someone is preparing. I have a question about brain development. So because me and my friends, we just like discussing brain development and stuff. And my friend, she asked me yesterday, because I talked to her, I am sitting with you and asking questions. She asked, aha, is there a difference between girl and a boy brain while they're developing? They have different hormones. So male, they have more testosterone, we have more estrogen, and we also have cycles. And she asked, is there a difference between boy and girl and their brains? Not only like social influence, but also because of the hormones.
So I get this question a lot. First, I want to say that the information we have about this is biased, because in the academic world today, the feminist perspective is controlling, and everyone who produces feminist research gets promoted, and anything that challenges the feminist view will hurt a person's career. So the information is very biased, and you can see why I left academia in order to be honest. So we're not getting the full story. And the same with the media. They're only presenting the feminist perspective. So even if there were differences, you only hear about the differences. You don't hear about the similarities. The similarities are so big. And I think that's why my work is popular with men, because it helps makes emotions acceptable to men. Because the feminist view of emotions that's being sold today is that caring about other people is all that matters in life, and you're not allowed to care about yourself. And I think that's crazy. It's just wrong and not true and biased, and yet all of our information is being filtered through that mindset. Now, having said that, I always go back to the evolutionary perspective. So in many animals, there's a specialization between the tasks that males do and the tasks that females do. And in early humans, there was a specialization between hunting and gathering. And again, because of the bias in academia, academics want everyone to be a vegetarian. So they want to ignore that hunting even existed. So again, it's just a bias. And because I'm so old, I have lived through so many different ideologies that I can always hope that the next one will be better, although I can't say that it will. So what is the difference between hunting and gathering? When you hunt, you have to focus on one thing and ignore everything else. So when you are trying to catch an animal to kill it, if you see fruit trees, you have to ignore them. And so the male brain, I think, is very good at focusing on one thing and ignoring everything else. And I can't physiologically point to the reason, but if there were any research on the reason, it would be ignored because it doesn't fit the feminist thing, you know. So females gathering. What does gathering mean? It means I don't know what I'm looking for. I'm keeping open to every possibility. And if I see a fruit tree over there, I have to look everywhere. But while I'm going to that fruit tree, maybe I will see something even better. Or maybe I will see a child who's hurt and I'll have to forget about the fruit tree because my survival depends on the survival of my genes. So investing in keeping my child alive has a higher value than finding the fruit tree. So we're always prioritizing our where to invest our energy. Every mammal brain is always making decisions about where to invest its energy. That's the dopamine reward for meeting a need, meaning the unmet need is what gives you dopamine. So again, the feminist bias is to suggest that the female way is better, whereas they're both valuable and hunting is valuable. And our brain is big because our ancestors got more protein and fat than earlier monkeys and apes. And a good book about that is called Catching Fire. Catching Fire. It's about how cooking food enabled our ancestors to get more nutrition. And men can only hunt if they know that they will have food even if they fail to hunt. And that's how it said that monogamy developed, because you have to have one person who hunts and one person who gathers. And like they share the risk of both strategies. And it was not in a group, but in a couple, that's the best way of getting the most resources and also minimizing risk. And the author who wrote this is now not popular because that doesn't fit the current popular view of collectivization, which I think Russians have the historical, hopefully the historical experience that collectivization is not the best strategy, but Americans in academia have forgotten that.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's really interesting. And what do you think about just girls and boys in school? Do we need to change an academic approach, or do we need to change something when we teach boys and when we teach girls? Does hormones influence their brains? If we talk about this?
There's a good book called The War on Boys. The current philosophy, again, in school is that everything is unfair to girls. So they're always trying to give girls advantages. And that has gone so far that the anti-boy culture is now prevailing in schools. And it's very sad. And I have 2.5 sons. I say that because I have one son and then one stepson who I got when he was 10. So, I mean, I have 1.5 sons, I guess I should say. So, the brain learns from rewards. We learn from whatever gets rewards. And I am not a fan of the current educational philosophy where everyone now is saying that tests are bad, because I was a college professor for 25 years, and I have seen that students get promoted whether they learn or not. And this happens for so long that they no longer even know that they haven't learned because they're faking it. They're just imitating words that other people say because our mirror neurons are very good at imitating, but they don't have developed the cognitive skills to read and do math. And it's a disaster to let this happen at a young age. So this is what matters for every child, boy or girl, and I don't think there's a difference. And when they say, you know, it's like many people, they think that hard skills like math and science are bad because they just like philosophy and art. And they tell kids, oh, you should just have fun. You shouldn't have to do anything that's not fun. Then by the time the years of neuroplasticity have passed, the child has not built the math skills. And then they say, well, it's not fair. They should be in computer science in equal percentages. But they don't have the foundational myelinated circuits to do the math. So we have to respect hard skills at a young age instead of telling kids they should just be having fun at a young age. And again, I think Russia has been very good at that, especially in the past. And I'm saying this because I know that many people grew up in a sort of cruel education system, and they don't like the cruel system. So they think in America, everyone is having fun and they want to have a fun system the way we had. So I want people to know that I raised my children that way, and I think it's wrong. I experimented on my own children, and it's wrong. So.
I have another question. If there is no one else who wants to ask a question, let me know with your hand. Just.
Yes, I see Katrina has her unmute, so yes.
My name is Christina. I'm an editor of Duty Hub portal. We're speaking about beauty, about healthy lifestyle, about happiness, about psychology. And one of the biggest demands and requests is as following. People are speaking about astrology, tarot cards, different marathons of wishes, desires, etc. What do you think about that? Whether this instrument is efficient or not? Because many people are just very abused with astrology. Living just by the coach's opinions, living by astrologists' opinions. What do you think about that?
So there's a few parts of it that I think are very helpful. So one of them is when you put your wishes into your conscious verbal brain. That's very useful. In the past, many people did that through praying, or some people did it by talking. All different ways to do it, but making a conscious thought of your wishes instead of leaving them in your unconscious. That's very useful. Another thing is, I think you may get social trust from this practice. Who do you trust? If I tell my deeper wishes to some of my friends, they may say something bad. They may not agree with my wishes. So I want someone who will be respectful when I tell them my wishes. And so when you are using this practice, you are giving yourself someone who will smile at your desires. Another positive benefit, I talk about in all of my books oxytocin, which is the animal impulse for social trust, to have social support. Now, what turns on our sense of trust? A big part of it is the oxytocin pathways that we built from early experience, which means whatever turned on my oxytocin when I was young. So let's say my babushka, who did astrology with me when I was young, for example. And then if I had a positive experience with my babushka, and then she's not here, then anyone who evokes the same oxytocin pathway gives me that good feeling, okay? I'm happy to hear, Christina, what do you think?
Well, in essence, I'm very skeptical about astrologists, but really, in recent times, even among my community, many people are doing some natal cards or maps or whatever. I just think that if it helps people, then that's good, if it really helps.
Yeah, well, you hear what I said, that it helps in a way that is biological, but you can get that biological benefit in ways that don't cost a lot of money. So I hope they're not spending too much money on it, or too much. You know, if they are doing that practice and not doing practical things, then it's bad. But if they do it to increase their motivation to take action, then it's good.
Loretta, thank you for the answers. Do you have opinion or guesses why it's mostly women who are into astrology and, you know, fortune tellers, and less persons of men who are into these, who are using these methods to work with their, I don't know how it's called, future thoughts?
What I'm thinking is, if you think about it as hunter versus gatherer, in a man's world, the reward is to impress the person above you in the hierarchy. That's how they get rewarded. So women are gathering advice from different people, but males are trying to impress the one who controls their future status. That's my opinion. And that's not to criticize men for seeking status, because women also seek status, but they're like gathering status instead of hunting status.
My next question is about social media addiction. Hello, everyone. What's like for you, watching on this big industry growing up from nowhere to like a real serious addiction? You know, we're getting dopamines and we're getting absolutely lost with our phones, and I think some people already have mental diseases caused by Instagram and comparing their life with people's life. What's your big opinion on this, and maybe some trends? Maybe I would ask you about 3 bad predictions about social media, and how we can work on this to save our mental health, you know, because this is like the alcohol. Small portions are accepted, but
yes,
you cannot feel this border.
Yes. So first, I want to tell you that I had a very funny experience with this. I was in Mexico, and there were pyramids in Mexico, the Mayan temples, and I climbed to the top of one of them. And at the top, there was a whole group of large number of people, and they were all on their phones. And I have a picture of it on a blog post. So if you go to my blog, it's innermammalinstitute.org/blog. And it's one of the first ones. You'll see that picture. And I also went to a temple in India, a real old temple with wild monkeys all over. And there's an Indian man in a turban and robes, and he's like on his phone. So I have these pictures on my website. Now, I'm not a big fan of the word addiction because people use that to blame. Many people are blaming the phone. It's not my fault, it's the phone's fault. It's the manufacturer of the phone's fault. So that's avoiding taking responsibility. So what is the challenge in life is to have social connections that feel good. And that means if you never have real physical connections, that's not great. But many people have real physical connections, but they feel bad. Like you go to work and you don't like the people, and you go out with your family and you don't enjoy them. So social media can have that good value that here are people that actually listen to me. But when I'm with my real life people, I can't say what I really think. So I think that's an okay balance. If you are having effective bonds at work and at home, but this is a release where you have people who will listen to what you really think. That's a healthy use. Now, unhealthy use, of course, is if you're not having other bonds, and or if you're having a lot of anger relationships on social media. There's a natural urge for anger, and natural urge for the one-up position, and natural urge for status. So we all have that, as my books explain why it exists in animals. So in your daily life, maybe you can't express your anger, or maybe you can't get respect. And so you look for it on social media. And if you do that, then you may get it, or you may be worse because you live in a fantasy world where you're not taking action in real life to get respect and to build healthy bonds. So it can be used either way. And I want to talk about couple of extremes. Many people think that without social media, that there was this ideal world of social relations, and there was not. You had many people who feared bonding, and so this is an easy form of bonding because it's so scared to bond. The reason it's scary, in most of human history, romantic relationships were forced on you. Your parents decided who that you would marry. And if you had a bad relationship, you were stuck. So once people had freedom of choice, they still did not necessarily have good relationships. There were a lot of bad relationships. And once people had the freedom to end their relationship, then they just have another and another. And that rejection is so hurtful. The idea that I could be in a relationship with someone and they can just drop me at a moment's notice. It's the worst pain that anyone can experience because we have such safe lives with no real hunger and no real violence. So being rejected by a lover in high school becomes like the biggest threat that anyone has. So then they're afraid to go out, and they're afraid to try and afraid to bond. Now, to make it worse, the sexual revolution allowed people to have sex without any bonding at all. I think it's insane. And so people are just having no incentive at all to confront that risk of forming a relationship and then having someone dump you. I don't know if you know the word dump, reject. It says the whole thing. So this problem existed before social media. I think with the virus now, it's, on the one hand, you could say it's increasing because people are relating to the world only through online. It's normalizing that, and it's making it easier to have your fear of real life bonds, but on the other hand, increases the reward of real life bonds, because if you could go out and have a coffee with someone, now you appreciate them more. So hopefully it will have a good effect. Now, I want to give you an example of a really bad, the worst possible fear of social bonds that I learned about, so that you know how bad it can get. And this is all before social media, maybe. In Japan, you may have heard about it. If you want to, so in Japan, there are young people who never leave their room, ever. So either they graduate from high school and they go into their room and never leave, or some of them refuse to go to high school. And what their parents do is to enable it. I hope you know the word enabling. And their parents give them food on outside their room, and they only open the door of their room at night after their parents are asleep. So their parents support this and they hide it because they're so embarrassed. And the origin of this is, they call it bullying, that there's a lot of bullying in Japanese schools. But there is some people who have gone too far in the other direction, and they're having anti-bullying programs, and now every child thinks they're being bullied. So what I think is, children were very cruel to each other in the past, and we need to have more positive courage and confidence that I don't need other children to be nice to me every minute. If I go to school and one child says a bad thing to me, I just don't focus on them. I focus on the children who are nice to me. And instead, kids are just obsessed with the one thing a person says that's bad. Now, I understand this. This is a natural thing. When I worked, I would focus on the one thing someone said something bad about me. And when I was a professor, if one student said something bad about me, I would focus on that. And when I have a reader write a bad comment about my book, my natural tendency is to put all of my attention on who said something bad about me. But I have learned that that is not real. That's just an old pathway, that when I was young, I was afraid of making someone mad at me. And that's a natural fear, but I'm creating it myself. And only I have the power to redirect myself to say, I'm going to focus on people who are nice to me and just not waste any of my energy on people who don't like me. And this is what children need to learn. And this is what you need in dating when you're trying to build social bonds. I'm going to just focus on people who are nice to me and forget about everyone else. And it's a skill that everyone can learn.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
To pick it up, it seems like the chain the incentive and the development of hormones for those triggers are developed in early ages.
Is there more? Oh.
It turns out, there was bad sound. So it turns out that the trigger and the hormones as a result of those triggers actually were built in the early ages, and then we can probably track that if we're not satisfied with our behavioral patterns and change that in our adult life to change our attitude towards different situations, right?
Yes, this is what I explain in all of my books, that we are born with no connections between our neurons. We have billions of neurons, but no connections. We build the connections when we're young from repetition and emotion. So emotion is the brain's signal that this is important. You need to know this, whether it's positive emotion or negative emotion. Repetition strengthens the connections, and then myelin, which is a substance we have a lot of when we're young, it coats the neural pathways and makes them into super efficient conductors of electricity, which is why we rely on those early pathways. When you're older, you have less myelin, so you can build a new pathway, but it's hard. It takes a lot of repetition, and if you rely on emotion, you might not get the kind of pathway you want. So that's why it takes a lot of repetition. So a simple example is learning a foreign language in adulthood. You can do it, but it takes a lot of repetition. Now, when people look at this, they're tempted to, I call it diseaseify. Diseaseify means to make it a disease. Like, I don't have the kind of responses that I want to have, so I find the name of a disease and a disorder. And the problem with that is that when people look for treatment, they may expect somebody else to fix them. And so it's good to get help, but to know that nobody can fix you. They can only help you to find the circuit that bothers you and to redirect it and to build a new circuit.
I have the following question. If I'm going too far, just tell me, because this is a very personal question.
Okay.
Me and my husband, we were thinking about adopting a child, and still this idea is with us. And I have a personal question. So you know that system, you know how the patterns are working, you know how hormones are working. Knowing this, all these things, was it difficult for you to restructure the child, to make your stepson make up with your habits, with your family, etc.? Because orphanages, for instance, in Russia are different, but still, it means that a child with one kind of experience is moved to the environment with a different environment, if I'm not stepping over the border, if it is not too personal.
Yeah, I just needed to stretch my legs. Yes, a very good question. It's a very, very, very difficult challenge. And I like to think that if I could do it today, I could do it more. I did not learn about what I know about the brain until I took early retirement when I was 50. So when I got my stepson, I was in my mid-40s. So I did not know any of this, and I was too much in my own old pathways, and so was my husband. So this was my second husband, of course. So agreeing on parenting is the hardest thing, because you are making parenting decisions with your inner child and they are making parenting decisions with their inner child. But if you can't agree, then the child knows the conflict and they always go with the parent who has lower standards, which is a disaster. And then the parent who has higher standards does not get love. So it's a very bad situation. That's not what happened to us, actually. We both had low standards, which is also bad. If you can have a lot of practice discussions with your partner before. I'm laughing because my son practiced with a dog. My son had a dog, and he and his wife, managed the dog, and they disciplined the dog. So it was good practice. Yeah. I have started studying animal training because it's so amazing. It's called, maybe you've heard of it, behaviorism or behavioral analysis. And it started in Russia, actually, some Russian, yes, so you probably know more about it, because in American psychology, and maybe even in Russian, it's no longer the trend, but very, very effective. And I think it's important to know that with a child whose foundational circuits are not ideal. The amazing thing, I talked about myelin. The highest myelin in your whole life is when you're 2 years old. It's amazing. So you can think that when you're born, your brain is like clay, and all of your physical connections are created when you're young. So for example, when animals are born, their arms and legs are already connected. When we're born, our arms and legs are not already connected. We are born premature. So this is how, and this is explained in my books, the bigger the brain, the more unconnected it is at birth. So lizards are born like as fully mature adults. They're born hardwired with adult survival skills. It's mind-blowing. And then the bigger the brain, the less programming. So even breathing has to be learned. An infant has to learn to breathe. So all of these basic things. Now, when a child has trouble, I'll give you a simple example, is eye contact is learned. And when I had a child who refused to make eye contact with me, or I had a student who refused to make eye contact with me, I had a bad reaction. And that reaction was 100% in me. So I needed to have the awareness that I was worsening the situation in a downward spiral by having that reaction that was from my past. So that's it. You have to be aware of what you're bringing to it, and then you can get help. But problem is, these behavioral professionals, they have a very strict thing, and they are not nice to parents. You know them, right? They think thank you. They think parents are all wrong and don't know anything and just shut up and let me do everything, right? So you have to, maybe you'll be better at finding the help that's really help rather than taking over. And it's a very worthwhile project. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Loretta, did you hear?
No, I'm
question?
not hearing anything. I thought you were just, okay.
No, it was Varia and her question.
Okay. Oh,
Just a question about how to deal with the people who are emotionally distant. Emotional distant.
Oh, okay. I respect those people. I think it takes time. Social trust takes time. And if someone's emotionally distant, it's because they've learned that their emotions don't get respected by others. So I often feel that way. Like normally when you're in a social group, in my experience, people complain and you're expected to agree with everyone's complaining. And if you want to be positive and don't agree with the complaining, then they are often angry at you and feel like you're not supportive. So then I think, if I want to say something positive and that's not going to be respected and people are just going to pour on their complaining, so then I don't even want to share my positive, so then it takes time. Mostly when people are in a group, they only share the emotions that they think the group agrees on. So it takes time to build like one-to-one trust so that I will respect your emotions and you will respect mine. Someone explained to me, if you imagine that we all have circles around us and we make decisions about like one person you let into this circle and another person you let into that circle. And it takes a big investment of energy to get into someone else's circle and deeper and let them in deeper to you. And we have a limited amount of energy. So we're always making decisions of, how much energy do I invest in this person or that person? I might have a lot of people at a distance or a small number of people closer. So everyone has a right to spread that energy in their own way. I'm not hearing anything.
Let me ask a question. May I ask a question?
Yes.
Housekeeping issue.
Yes.
So she's explaining how translation can be selected on a smartphone because Barbara is on the street. I have a question. Tell me, please. If a person has a very high level of cortisol, what does it mean? High level of cortisol, what does it mean?
So I wrote a third book called Tame Your Anxiety, Rewiring Your Brain for Happiness. And I don't know, has MIF also published this one, Anastasia, or is that a different publisher? No, okay, because in the US, it's a different publisher. So I never knew how it was in Russia. So excuse me for mentioning the other book, that Tame Your Anxiety. I don't know the name in Russia, but I will show you. Excuse me. So this, we can think that cortisol is on and off. So when you have a big spurt of cortisol, your body digests and eliminates it. When I say digests, it metabolizes, okay, not in your stomach. And you eliminate half of it in 20 minutes. So that means after 40 minutes, you've gotten rid of 75% of it. While you're having that cortisol, it is telling you to look for threat because that's the job, is to say, find the danger. So during that time, you're going to see a lot of negatives. And then you may release more cortisol because you're looking for negatives. So in the book, I explain that when you have a cortisol spurt, a good strategy is to do something fun, to give your body time to eliminate it, because otherwise you'll have more cortisol in another hour and another hour. You know, it's a spiral where one bad thought leads to another bad thought and you're always having cortisol. Or you could just accept it and say, I'm having a cortisol spurt, I'm going to stop and relax, and then go back to being positive after I've eliminated 75% of it in 20 minutes.
I'm speaking about a different thing. I'm speaking about different thing.
Oh.
I have a very high level of cortisol, and it is not because it is just up. I have high level of cortisol in the morning, on the daytime, at night, in the evening, meaning that I did some chemical analysis, and my level of cortisol is more than the average level by the factor of 10 or 15 throughout the day. And this is a permanent thing, every day.
Okay.
24/7. And at the same time, I don't have any anxiety, any worries. And you said that there are no people who are happy every second, every minute. But I'm just like that person. I'm a person who is following certain insights, and I'm happy every second of my life. And this is proven by the samples and analysis. I have an anti-stress hormones which are exceeding the volume of the stress hormones.
Which anti-stress hormones, please?
I did a medical analysis, a very expensive one. Stress hormones and anti-stress hormones. And doctors, they even had a kind of a concilium, a team meeting, and they said that for the first time they see a person whose anti-stress hormones are exceeding the stress hormones, because in real life this almost never happens. And at the same time, I have a very high level of cortisol. So you connect cortisol to the motivation, but at the same time you connect that to stress. So in essence, this happens that you have certain stress, and that means that you have a good motivation for something. But you cannot be 24/7 in that situation, in that state. So it means that I'm totally unique, because I always have a very high level of cortisol, but at the same time, I'm a person who is just like Buddha. I'm totally quiet. I'm totally happy every second of my life. I'm absolutely pleased with my life. You were speaking about social media. That you said that one of the ladies said that she is very anxious about social media, but in my Instagram, I have 1,600,000 subscribers, and I don't care who is saying what. And social media for me is just a tool. I have several accounts. I use that in my working life. I don't have any fears, social fears. I know very well my basic fears. You said that, in fact, almost all the people who are writing books, who are developing certain trainings, who are developing certain techniques and methodologies as to how to reach happiness, never use these techniques themselves. So it means that I'm also not sticking to your template, because I have created a technique, a methodology, which I'm using for 6 years, almost every day.
Can we
And
get
27,000 people are living by it, are following this methodology, this technique. Just, I would like to disagree in that sense. I would disagree with a lot of what you have said. There should be some exceptions from the rules. Every rule has an exception.
can we get to the question?
Вопрос. The reason why I was invited to that seminar, why, despite my busy schedule, I was listening to you all the time, because this topic is very close to my heart. The topic you're working with, you're focusing on how to interact with the cells. You spoke a lot about neurons, about hormones. And this is a tremendous topic.
Can we get to the question, please? Can she ask a question? Or like one sentence question, or else we can move on.
What do you think? Can we agree with the hormones just like we get into agreement with the cells? For instance, a human being and the cell, do they hear each other? Can they get connected somehow?
I'm not sure if she's saying cell, C-E-L-L, or self, S-E-L-V.
Cell, C-E-L-L, probably cells.
So
like hormones, for instance, hormones.
Cells.
Hormone, just like an entity within a man. Can a man or a human being get into agreement with the hormones? For instance, there is an individuality, and within our body, we have certain cells, we have certain neurons. Can we get into agreement with them, set an agreement with them somehow, live in an agreement with them?
Okay, so first I want to say that if you have your own method and it's working for you, that's good, and anybody it works for, I'm happy. When I talk about agreement, it's between the mammal brain and the verbal brain. So in my experience, the verbal brain is only a small percentage of what's going on. When you talk to yourself, that people are mostly saying things that they've learned to make themselves feel good, but it's not necessarily their full experience. So the cells are connected in certain ways, our neurons are connected in certain ways. Some of those connections control our hormones. Some of those connections control our language and verbal thought process. And the challenge is to connect the two so that when I'm having a physiological response, that I can better understand that with my verbal brain. So that's the whole focus of my work, and you're welcome to agree or not agree. Other questions? Okay. Well, I actually need to move on if that's okay, because I'm getting very stiff. If there's no other questions, it's hard for me to sit so long. Other questions? I'm not hearing anything. Is anybody talking? Is anybody talking? I'm not hearing.
Loretta, thank you so much.
Oh, okay.
Barbara says because obviously she cannot speak into the English channel.
Okay.
Loretta, thank you so much, Barbara.
Thank you, Barbara. So nice to meet you. Nice to meet you all. I appreciate your questions so much. Bye-bye.